Hello International Finance students. We're in week 6 here. We're quickly approaching the end of the course. For this week, you'll need to do the homework problems, participate in a brief forum discussion I put out there about some recent tariffs imposed by the Chinese on chicken, actually, of all things. Probably a retaliation for a Obama tariff that was put in place a couple of years ago. So I want you to do a little research on the topic and post your opinions and your thoughts on the subject. And make sure to do that. Try to do it early in the week and allow your time to post some other students. This week is kind of the last 3 weeks, or excuse me, 3 chapters that will be on the next exam. So the following week, I'll have the exam out there early on Sunday, and you'll just have one brief chapter to kind of wrap things up. But it is important to kind of work on that paper this week, and it can be on any problem associated with any multinational enterprise. In fact, the example of Tyson facing right now with the tariffs on their chicken, how are they dealing with this? That could be a topic for a paper. So looking at chapter 12, 13, and 14 this week, chapter 12 kind of revisits that cost of capital idea, particularly the weighted average cost of capital, something you would have addressed in a finance course. We got the benefit from the after-tax cost of debt. It actually lowered the overall tax of capital. But, in terms of what is the true opportunity cost for an M&E when they're seeking projects and returns on those projects. So you kind of do a little bit of review in this chapter. And again, it's the authors bring about a good point. Is it really, you would think in theory that if we could go internationally and diversify, we could experience a lower cost of capital, be able to maybe take on more projects. But reality is that maybe because of political risk and other risks, the weighted average cost of capital may actually be higher. So again, remember that weighted average cost of capital, think of it as a hurdle rate that the investor wants or needs in order to make the project worthwhile. So if the weighted average cost of capital for a multinational enterprise is 10% and the return on that investment is only 8%, we're not truly meeting the investor's opportunity cost. So we do quite a bit of theory in that chapter. Chapter 13 looks at sourcing equity and debt globally. It's kind of interesting. They point out that what is the right mix of financing for the firm, debt or equity. Of course, as we use more debt, the weighted average cost of capital will decline. But at some point, as we take on more debt, it's perceived to be a higher risk. So it's a fine balance there. And on page 354, they kind of point out that minimum cost of capital range. That is, at some point, as the debt ratio becomes too big, there's concern, are you going to be able to pay this debt back? Are you leveraging yourself too much? And with equity, you don't have to pay anything back, but with debt, you have to make those interest payments every 6 months or annually, so that can be a higher risk if cash flows are not as good as you were expecting them to be. Okay, and in fact, in that chapter 2, they also include like an example of the true cost of interest, especially if I have to make a kind of foreign exchange transaction, may actually make costs go up quite a bit more. And you look a little bit more kind of how things are listed, different exchanges and different ways to access capital. Some debt may have floating rates, some may be fixed, and there might be opportunities for multinational enterprises to attract capital. They can either be through such examples as American depository receipts, or it could just be direct placements. I just go directly to an insurance company and offer them to help fund my multinational enterprise. The last chapter, chapter 14, is always the fun chapter with taxes, but kind of this chapter starts off and looks at the question of what is the right amount of tax. A country charging a tax wants to try to put a tax in place that's going to be equitable and fair to everyone, but doesn't necessarily hinder economic activity. And especially in our upcoming presidential election, you're going to hear a lot about tax fairness. Who should bear the burden of these taxes? At the same time, if we're going to have a lot of government expenditures, how are we going to fund all these expenditures without increasing the debt too much? So one of the interesting examples they mentioned in the chapter is with transfer pricing. If I have one country that has a really high tax rate, like the United States does have a very high tax rate, almost 40%. And many U.S. companies actually keep their money parked overseas and never bring it back because of the concern of such a high tax rate. Eventually if it would be transferred to the United States, it would be taxed, but that may never happen. But through transfer pricing, if there is a country that has a very high tax rate, I may make the cost of goods even higher for that country, and that way they pay overall less taxes in the overall scheme of things. And if we look at the kind of the page, let me find it here. Yeah, page 393, they give a good example on that page where the high markup policy actually resulted in almost going from 470 to 500 in net income, so it would improve the situation. But again, we have to kind of be careful with this because any taxing authority is going to look at things closely and they're going to say, hey, are you trying to hide taxes? So, well, that was it for this week, but do send me an email if you have any questions. So this is going to be our heavy week. Kind of the last week is going to be the lighter week with just like one chapter and just the exam to go. So keep plugging away and you'll do a great job, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.